Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Todd Fernandez with Climate Crisis Policy, and I'll be your host today. Today we're taking a deeper dive into the bills we've been reviewing for a package. We have Jake Davis of Family Farm Action who will lead us through most of the bills. Liz Henderson from Northeast Organic Farmers of New York will also provide insights, and Joshua Chafee of our marketing team may chime in with elements in the bills that make for good storytelling. We'll also invite Q&A in the chat, and Liz and I will try to keep up there. Since our first call July 1st, things have progressed rapidly. We now have a full team, including a core team with over 40 people on Monday calls, the first and third Mondays of the month. With everyone, welcome to those. We have an adopted district coordinating team, Meryl, Tara, and Paula, thank you. There are over 35 districts adopted in over 16 states. Thank you all, this is a great start. We have a great marketing team headed by Brenna, Joshua, and Jonathan, all with great professional expertise in this area, and a bill review team with sector leads. Thank you all for stepping up there. And we have a faith team led by Corinna, thank you, and volunteer coordination by Christine. So we're well teamed up. Briefly, for new folks, Adopted District is our organizing framework, getting point people to adopt each of the 435 congressional districts, and then to organize many coalitions to pursue co-sponsorship of bills. We'll have more guidance on this soon and a toolkit with step-by-step suggestions on how to engage local electeds and community groups. There's an intake form if you'd like to adopt a district. That team is also looking for regional and state leads in the South and West Coast, which you can indicate on the intake form as well. Our bill review team is going to look at bills and the U.S. House Climate Crisis Select Committee's action plan. We've formed teams to match the sectors on the policy digest, and we'll have a poll later in the call to invite you to sign up for sector teams. Everyone on adopted district and sector bill teams is encouraged to attend the Monday night core team calls, where we'll figure out how these teams will meet and work. The next call is on Monday, August 17th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Notices will go out, and hopefully everyone is on our list. I'm still struggling to figure out who all is on which list, but we'll get that in better shape soon, and anyone who wants to help there, please let me know. I could go on about this organizing, but today is really a deep dive into the bills we're looking at for a climate bill package. The idea here is that local groups seeking co-sponsors will decide for themselves which bills to support. And our role is preparing the materials, describing each bill, and putting them in the toolkit along with general promotion of the package of ideas. On that front, the bills up for consideration tackle a lot of great things: regenerative agriculture, planting billions of trees, and restoring wetlands with a big Job Corps, banning toxic pesticides, banning confined animal feeding operations and fracking, banning imports of products from illegally deforested areas globally, banning hydrofluorocarbons, and stopping big mergers in the food ag with a review of antitrust issues there. It's a nice array of issues, but there's a lot missing still, of course. Generally, this approach is geared at getting us started working with real legislation that is supported by coalitions, Project Drawdown, the Policy Digest, Save and Center. Other criteria include greenhouse gas reduction impacts, which we have a team on, Paul and Keith, thank you, and antitrust impacts, which is a core theme in this battle to reclaim our democracy and retake control over national policymaking from the corporate powers destroying our planet. More broadly, the idea is also to unite groups and activists' passion from the various topics so that together we can build real power to get major legislation passed in 2021. As we figure out what's good, bad, and missing, ultimately we'll be likely pushing on two main fronts. One, to make Congress take action on major climate legislation in 2021, and two, to figure out what's missing in any proposals that come forward, especially with regard to the pace of greenhouse gas reductions and the push for bolder, faster action. Passing legislation is a journey, and it's important to remember that no bill is perfect. These are all pieces of a bigger pie, and the legislation on the table next year could be in very different forms. This will be like a roller coaster ride, and fun if we stay relaxed and ready to flow along and adapt as the landscape changes. So let's dive in. We'll take each bill in order, give an overview of the content, support from groups and coalitions, and answer questions. Please try to keep the chat focused on the topic at hand so it's easier to follow, and please lead your questions with the word question in quotes so we can find those. At the end, we'll poll on support for the bills. We don't have a formal approval process, but we'll take the temperature of the room and see where to go from there. With that, I'd like to invite Jake Davis from Family Farm Action Alliance to walk us through the bills on the table. Thank you, Jake, and welcome. The floor is yours.
Very good. Thank you so much, Todd. And thanks for having me back. And thanks for obviously, including many of these important bills on agriculture issues. We recognize that it's going to take a broad coalition to support future climate action, and eager to be a part of that broad coalition. I'm going to do my best here to share my screen 1 second. All right. So I'll just start out by saying that Family Farm Action Alliance, the collaboration of organizations, has been working on the climate issue in one form or another for the last 3-ish years, kind of starting in 2017. And we've collaborated on and sort of advised in some of the creation of the policy that we're going to talk about today. Along the process, obviously, not all of our priorities, made it into every piece of legislation, and I'll try to talk a little bit about, just briefly, about the history of how that sort of each bill's coalition came together, and some of the supporters and those sorts of things, to sort of give folks a lay of the land of where we're at. So I'm going to dive right in. So the first one I think is useful to start with is the Food and Agriculture Merger Moratorium, Food and Agribusiness Merger Moratorium bill, which is probably just particularly its first in sequence in the sort of chronology of the way we've been working on this. Antitrust issues are sort of core to the focus of Family Farm Action and the work that we've sort of built our priorities around. And so ultimately it was critical to begin by starting with something in the sort of antitrust and competition arena. This bill had a lot of input from a really large number of stakeholders, the coalition of folks, of organizations supporting this, somewhere in the ballpark of 250 organizations now, everything from sort of, traditional farm and food agriculture groups to environmental groups to consumer advocacy groups. It just makes a significant amount of sense to, number one, think about at least what we can do in an industry, in a hyper consolidated industry of agriculture, what we can do to sort of bring attention to and kind of pump the brakes on the over consolidation in the system. So per a farm tour that I was able to participate in with Senator Booker back in 2017, and a number of our folks participated in a sort of Midwest farm tour that the senator did. His team got particularly interested in this issue. They collaborated with Senator Tester, who is, as many know, they were the only working farmer in the Senate. So it made a lot of sense to partner there. The bill has also been led by Representative Pocan on the House side of Wisconsin. Just to highlight the sort of there's really pretty simply, and we can dig into the details of how we do this if folks want to do that, but really this bill does two very simple things. It, number one, creates a moratorium on any new agribusiness or food business mergers above a certain threshold. So clearly we're not targeting sort of small businesses, right? We're talking about folks that have more than $160 million in sales and a variety of things that sort of set a benchmark to say that above that level, we want to just push the pause button on any future consolidation of those folks. And when we say consolidation, particularly, we're talking about either acquisition of, security shares in the company or, over a certain percentage, or sort of full takeover or merger of those companies. This bill was sort of put forward in the wake of some of those very big mergers that many of you might be familiar with, of WH Group purchasing Smithfield Foods, which is WH Group is a Chinese firm, and they purchased one of the largest agriculture mergers in history, and then Bayer purchasing Monsanto. That sort of merger also created hyper consolidation in the sort of seed sector. So that was where this was born out of, and those things were sort of very important in the framing in 2017 and 18, and so this was an effort to push a pause button on those type of mergers. The second thing then that the bill does is it says that pause should be put in place until a commission can be outlined, and a congressional commission can be outlined, hold hearings, do an investigation, create a report about the impacts of consolidation on our food system and on the U.S. economy. We would anticipate and push for the idea that obviously also climate impacts of these sort of multinational agribusiness corporations be included in any sorts of hearings and conversations, reports, etc., from that commission. And then that moratorium would not be lifted until until Congress decides to identify that they are passing comprehensive concentration reform. So whether that be updates to the antitrust laws or other sorts of things, that would sort of need to be signaled and identified in future legislation before this moratorium would be lifted. So that's the sort of first step on concentration. I'll stop there, Todd, and see if maybe folks have any specific questions on this bill, and then we can jump on to the next if it makes sense.
All right. Any questions particularly to this bill? And it's okay if you don't have any specifically and you want to ask some later. We're going to go through all these bills, and if we don't have questions on this one, that's fine. Doesn't look like we do have any specific questions.
Okay.
Well, it says there's a question, how does climate specifically figure in?
Yeah, so I think that the one thing that we need to sort of, and we need to continue to frame the narrative around is that these, hyper consolidated multinational agribusinesses are the ones that are contributing sort of the most to climate change. And so ultimately, that hyper consolidated system and the current market conditions that exist are such that it makes it very difficult for farmers and ranchers to shift the way that their production system works to be more sort of what we might call climate smart or regenerative, or whatever word you might want to use to describe that. The sort of low margin and high incentive structure of our current food system, agriculture system, is really one that is lending itself to farmers and ranchers and sort of the system itself externalizing the cost and the concerns of things like manure pollution and a whole range of other things. So while this doesn't sort of fix any of the consolidation issues that the climate change issues that might be occurring from that, what it does do is sort of prevent the idea that instead of 4 firms controlling a polluting industry, it could consolidate down to 3 or 2, and obviously those folks would continue to have even more power legislatively to push back against a potential climate package that we all might want to see. So that's why we sort of start with that framing.
And I'll just add though, the entire effort that we're in is an antitrust battle, really about corporate power and consolidation of power, both in industry, in their industry market share, but their political power. So we're not looking on the fossil fuel fronts and the on the big pharma. There's not really a push on that front because they want to, on fossil fuel, we want to completely, change that industry. And but this industry, by its consolidation, is basically thwarts all the efforts at regenerative farming and farming that happens at a smaller scale that could be healthier on many ways to soil management and the carbon sinks and all of these other efforts. So, but this is just one piece of the pie at trying to break up the oligarchy control that has the concentrated power as well, political power. All right, so we have some other questions. They're not specifically related. One is 18 months enough? I feel like we should maybe go on a little bit because it's already 12:20. We have a lot to cover and we might not get to everything, and we'll answer some of the questions later.
Yep, great. I think my screen sharing stopped, yep. So I'm going to try to cover the next two together, and then there might be several questions about this, but I think that these two sort of fit together in a lot of ways. So first, we are looking at the Climate Stewardship Act. So the Climate Stewardship Act was a process of thinking about what could we do under sort of a purely appropriations kind of approach to the climate crisis, and what sort of existing USDA programs and what sorts of programs might exist out there that we could find ways to sort of spend additional funds to stimulate the process of working on sequestering carbon, reducing emissions, etc. So the Climate Stewardship Act was a real collaboration between a number of sort of independent family farm groups and environmental groups, thinking about what currently existed in law and what sorts of easy sort of innovative programs could we invest in that might do that. This is led again by Senator Booker. I think there's a theme here on the food and farm side of this. Senator Booker's office has been a real champion for that, but also Deb Haaland's office. Deb Haaland from New Mexico. Many of you will know, one of the two first Native American women in Congress, took this bill on sort of as a significant, one of her most significant first agricultural projects from New Mexico's first. And we work collaboratively with a whole team of folks. I think there's, something nearing on 100 organizations supporting this. Just to get to the sort of meat and potatoes of what the bill does, and I've really framed this out at a very high level because it is there's a lot in the bill, and we can talk about specifics if folks want to. But it's really divided into three sections. The agricultural component of this bill is looking at current farm bill programs. So I've got a lot of sort of alphabet soup here on this slide, but think of those as the farm bill programs that are in the conservation title or in the agriculture marketing title. These are programs that we know are sort of beneficial to climate change. And then we dug down even further and identified from what NRCS, the USDA's conservation division, identified as what they call climate smart practices. So the bill actually identifies a number of climate smart practices on the land. That's things like we've all heard of, the things that, from previous presentations, things that are in those natural climate solutions from the building blocks report, like planting cover crops and managing nutrients better and silvopasture and a variety of things that we already know either sequester carbon or reduce emissions. And we made significant investments through these other programs, through all these programs in those sorts of particular practices. So CSP, or the Conservation Stewardship Program, is probably the preeminent conservation program that most of these bills invest in. But there are a number of other programs, the Conservation Reserve Program, which is a land set-aside program. We invested in the local agriculture marketing program to try to build a more resilient local and regional food system to be kind of climate crisis ready. So there's a whole series of things, a bunch of programs I didn't even list. The other one in that sector that's probably worth mentioning is a really big investment in the REAP program, which is Rural Energy for America. And that is particularly focused at on-farm renewable energy, about $3 billion annually for a 10-year period, to try to get more sort of solar panels and windmills and those sorts of things on farms all across the country. One, to give those folks a sort of, a significant cost reduction in their own energy, but also, potentially to feed back onto the grid. Then there are two more big pillars that sort of came together around that, which is coastal wetland restoration and revitalization and protection, and then 16 billion trees, so 2 million acres of coastal wetland restoration or protection, and then 16 billion trees planted. The Climate Stewardship Act really focused on the idea that, we needed sort of a New Deal era approach, and in the New Deal era, significant numbers of tree plantings occurred all over public lands. This bill even goes further and creates public-private partnerships. It creates a sort of a civilian conservation, or invests in sort of current structures for a civilian conservation corps. And it ensures that urban areas have opportunities to plant trees for resilience. So that's that, and then I'm gonna jump just one more to the Agriculture Resilience Act, which then was led by Representative Pingree of Maine, who is also a farmer, organic farmer, and went through an entire process in her home state of Maine, asking sort of what could be done around the climate change issues, particularly for farmers and ranchers. And this is sort of the framing that those folks came up with. They organized the thoughts a little bit differently, and I collaborated on a number of these and offered lots of material for them to sort of work through. I think that the process for that ultimately landed even maybe a step further. I would say that the Agriculture Resilience Act doesn't invest quite as many dollars in some of the programs, but then there's another sort of group of steps that this bill took, which is to invest heavily in research to think about regenerative practices in agriculture. That includes strengthening the climate hubs, which USDA sort of has, but uses not particularly effectively now. It put a focus on regenerative livestock production, which we know has been a significant theme around the country. There's a number of sort of particularly high-profile folks talking about that. It was mentioned in the sort of presidential primary debate by folks like Tim Ryan. It has had a couple of documentaries, Carbon Cowboys, which featured folks like Will Harris, who I know, and now a new documentary, Kiss the Ground, that's coming out. So there's a whole range of sort of momentum around that sort of regenerative livestock production that's not sort of oriented around the confinement systems that we have now, but more sort of focused on, grass-based. There's also a lot of talk in Congress about soil health. So many of the same sort of conservation programs that I was talking about earlier, get placed in the soil health category in this bill. And then, another thing that is really sort of near and dear to folks' heart, in the fact that we, waste about a third of the food that we produce, is that this bill tackles directly food waste. So food waste in schools, food waste in institutions and restaurants, those sorts of things, so that we can sort of minimize and find ways to both, either best use food that might be wasted, but also sort of reduce and eliminate as much of the food waste as possible. So so those two, in my mind, sort of go together of sort of working in a way to restructure the way that USDA and USDA research and all those sorts of things fit together to sort of point them in the direction, point our sort of largest federal agriculture organization, and even then to this bill, some of our sort of state agriculture institutions in the direction of focusing on climate change as a key priority, either sequestering carbon and or reducing emissions. So I'll stop there, Todd, and see what we have coming in for questions now.
All right, great. Wonderful.
I have a question if I can.
Well, if you could type it, it would be better. Who's this?
This is Jan Rose.
Oh, hi, Jan.
Hi.
Well, go ahead and ask her
actually,
why we're looking at others. Sure.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask, there's a current program created for the COVID crisis called Farms to Families that is designed to take all of the food that was lost through the supply chains to restaurants and divert it to families during the COVID crisis. It expires in October, and I wonder if that program can be extended via the Agriculture Resilience Act.
Yeah, I don't think, well, first of all, that program sort of didn't exist until the CFAP, until USDA sort of, until the CARES Act was passed, and USDA then sort of took a bundle of the money that they were sort of oriented and given, and they created that sort of out of thin air. I think there's a lot of value to some of those components and the ideas around that. I also think that there has been a fair bit of criticism politically about sort of how that program has been administered. So I think that one of the things that the Agriculture Resilience Act does is it sort of more focuses that not necessarily on, just to sort of back up to COVID, ultimately COVID interrupted the supply chains of a very brittle system in our sort of agriculture markets. And so we had a lot of food that was sort of traditionally going to institutions and restaurants that needed to be transitioned over to sort of, home use and family use. So in the short term, that program sort of solved some of those problems. But the Agriculture Resilience Act even goes sort of potentially further than that and says, even once we're getting that food to sort of an institution, a hospital, a restaurant, a school, then how do we promote them, not wasting so much and not throwing so much away? So I think that both things are important, and I think that we need to sort of be thinking about how can we reform this farm to families kind of program in a way that really does sort of directly link up sort of wasted or additional food in the supply chain, into this sort of, production system. One of the things we have the most concern about is that, farmers are also, sort of beyond COVID, farmers are also going to sort of need a fair price for that, or it's going to be what they'll do is ultimately just reduce production. So.
All right. So if we could just get everyone to raise your hand if you want to ask a
Todd, I typed my question.
If you type it, it's better because there's 94 people on the call, so we can't really have everybody just asking questions randomly. It'll be chaotic. So I'm sorry, who was speaking? Was that?
This is Shayok. I typed in my question.
I see your question, Shayok. So it's a little bit of a complicated question because you're asking, so let me go back to it. He's wondering, he says that the bills are broad and complex. He's wondering if they can susceptible to being hijacked by industry interests like lobbyists and lawyers who pick up the incentives and do nothing for the climate. I'm sure I totally understand that, but
yeah, that's a very important question. I mean, definitely agree that that's a very important question. So what I think the answer to that is that sort of before any piece of legislation is passed, obviously it's susceptible to hijack. But I think one of the things that was done in a number of ways in these pieces of legislation was to use sort of really good scientific, analysis, particularly, for example, the Climate Stewardship Act. We use that building blocks report from USDA as well as a significant amount of research that was done, by folks like the Nature Conservancy to sort of outline and identify which of those specific practices had to be implemented. So what we can be sure of is that in both of these bills, that there are very specific practices that we have good historic science that tells us they either reduce emissions or capture carbon. But I do think that sort of anything related to carbon trading and those sorts of things, those things definitely are sort of subject to hijack. And so, I think neither of these bills set up that kind of process. They sort of, point in the direction of possible revenue streams to help USDA figure out, do good research on that, help universities do good research on that, and sort of target them at a specific, area. But I think I think the coalition of folks, and I think if you looked at the sort of broader coalition of folks who, sort of endorsed these bills, I think most of them would argue that, there's a pretty significant chance that the sort of farmers and ranchers that this is targeted to are going to be doing the practices and getting the sort of climate change benefits. The other thing to sort of note, particularly about that industry hijack, is that these sort of all the practices identified are really directed specifically to either farmers and ranchers or to institutions like schools or hospitals or restaurants. Very little of this is in a position that it would go to a sort of multinational corporation. That's a big priority of ours as well. So we didn't sort of we made it in such a way that very few of the incentives could go directly to those folks.
All right, wonderful. Somebody was asking, let's see, it's 12:36. So we have a few questions. And now Liz is also monitoring the questions and keeping a track of questions that we don't get into right now that we might try to get into at the end if we have time. And then we'll also keep a list of the questions and, put them in some form so we can do Q&A and get answers that we don't cover everything. But so the question is how this relates to the Farm Bill, but, and I guess from an organizational question, I think that's a good question is, we all know that the bill gets co-opted and so is this organizing thread of, our approach going to be a counterbalance to that? And what do you see in that front briefly?
Yeah, I think that's a critical question. Many of the programs, both of these bills sort of target are sort of historically outlined Farm Bill programs. And so just to get everyone up to speed about where we're at, we had a Farm Bill cycle in 2018 where we really didn't make any significant changes to our federal policy process. We had there were some tweaks here and there and some improvements made, but really sort of since any, and just so also folks know, the Farm Bill process only happens every 5 years. So there was some significant overhauls in policy, let's say in 2013 in that previous Farm Bill, but none of them that really significantly targeted climate change in 2013. And then we had what I would sort of refer to as a status quo Farm Bill in 2018. What that leaves us is a Farm Bill process in 2023 that that's likely sort of to come too little too late in the agriculture sector as we have one of the first, worst farm economies in history, or at least in the last, 60 years, facing us now, already a terrible farm economy before COVID and now much worse after. So ultimately, the sort of climate components can be a way for other groups that are not as, potentially active in the Farm Bill process to weigh in on sort of shaping our federal farm and food policy and do it significantly, do it in a much more timely manner than sort of waiting on 2023.
All right, wonderful. And the whole point of this is that we haven't had critical mass and political power in any of these sectors, not only in the farm and ag, but all the fossil fuel and everything really, right? We've been losing all of these battles. So by coming together in a collective, we're going to hopefully increase our political power so that we actually get results. So I'm struggling to keep up with all the questions and comments, but I think we're doing all right. There are some bigger questions about phasing out livestock generally, feed, and I had some questions about mandates, like when are we going to mandate? These are all these incentive programs.
Yeah.
But what about mandating? And so we're going to get, just so people understand our process a little bit, we're going to be constantly evaluating what's missing. So we don't have to get hung up on what's missing from every bill right now. We could support these bills knowing that there's more to come, and we'll be compiling lists of what's missing and what should be, what we should be asking for that's bigger than anyone maybe hoped they could achieve, and that's why maybe it's not in legislation yet. So we'll be going through that process. But if you just want to speak briefly, it's 12:39. We have several bills more to cover, and then we can come back to these broader issues. But just a little, what do you think, Jake? Should we keep moving and come back to those questions, or?
Yeah, I think maybe we come back to the big picture questions.
Okay.
After, particularly because the issues around livestock, we can the next bill will talk a little bit about livestock.
Todd, I think there might have to be a discussion specifically at some time about the livestock meat eating thing.
Yeah,
a conversation between city people and farming people, because there are a lot of issues that I think are really complicated and
wonderful. I got that, Liz.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll put a pin in this, and we'll remember.
We need to try not to have a big fight over this.
Oh, got it. All right, so we're going to put a big pin in that, and we're going to hold it for later. All right, go ahead, Jake. Let's go on to the next bills, and then we'll keep circling back to any questions we missed. Liz is there. Oh, before we move on, though, Keith, did you want to? You had the drawdown analysis of. Well, we'll do that at the end too. Let's do that at the end. Never mind. Keep going, Jake.
Okay, very good. Well, I'll just, so particularly because sort of the animal issue was on folks' mind, the next bill that is here is one that we work collectively with a whole range of groups. There's this is particularly in chronological order, one of the latter bills, so it just was introduced sort of later last year, that Family Farm Action Alliance and others worked on to work with Food and Water Watch and a number of the sort of, animal advocate groups like ASPCA and a number of others to sort of focus on the Farm System Reform Act. So again, we have Senator Booker leading, we have, Rep. Khanna introducing this in the House. We've got some significantly big names on this in the Senate. Senator Warren, Senator Sanders support this bill, or co-sponsors of this bill. So this bill focuses on the sort of brokenness, I think that's the way Senator Booker would describe it, the brokenness of the animal agriculture system. And what we have right now is a highly concentrated sort of meat packing system that is then, a lot of animals are fed into by concentrated animal feeding operations. You might see that acronym CAFOs that I have on here. That's what that stands for, concentrated animal feeding operations, which is ultimately when animals are confined in sort of what most people think of or refer to as factory farms, and that, also are significant pollution contributors, pollute. There's a significant amount of problems in the Great Lakes region with algae blooms. Got a lot of pollution from, sort of manure production as well as other factories and industry. We have, lots of sort of air pollution issues. We've got lots of manure waste that's being spread. So we're trying to address that in this bill. And the first thing that the bill does right up front is it halts any new construction or expansion of what we call large CAFOs. So I want to sort of also be clear that this bill doesn't address small family, independent family farmers. I think it's important for folks to recognize that there's been sort of, meat production from independent family farmers, livestock production from independent family farmers for generations. But what is sort of new in the last 4 or 5 decades is these sort of enormous concentration facilities. And when we talk about enormous, we mean you know, 30,000 dairy cows in sort of one location, or, you know, 1 to 2 million broiler chickens in one location. So we're talking about, you know, really big operations when we talk about at the top of the largest factory farms. So no expansion of those, and the attempt is to phase those out by 2040. So the bill basically, you know, suggests that those folks have to dissolve and find ways to reduce their overall number of productions. They don't have to, the farm doesn't have to go away, or they don't have to get rid of it, but the corporate integrators and those sorts of things who have sort of brought these really big factory farms together are, you know, this is sort of the window of time that it might take to figure that out. So so that's the first thing that it does. But there's a lot of other things that it does that folks, you know, that first one I just talked about, that's the one that gets all the sort of news media attention and those sorts of things. But we were able to bring a lot of independent family farm groups together around this bill because of some of these other things that it does. So you know, one big thing it does is it invests $10 billion a year for 10 years, or $100 billion fund to help farmers and ranchers who've sort of gotten trapped in these contract growing systems where 70% of poultry growers live at or below the poverty level. But, you know, they got into these contracts 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you know, sold a bill of goods by some of these largest meat corporations about how much money they were going to make, and now they're trapped in basically farm mortgages that if they stopped producing, they would lose their land, the land they might have inherited from their family and that sort of thing, because that's what they're asked to do. They're asked to sort of mortgage their farm to build the building to house the animals. They don't actually own the animals or the feed or the inputs, but their job is to house the animals and take care of the manure, basically. So they need a transition fund to get out of that. That's sort of just basic just transition sort of language, and we've gotten a ton of support for that idea. The other thing that we have to do in the livestock sector is, if we want to end factory farming, we also have to restructure the way the market works. The market has been hyper consolidated. There just aren't any markets. Many independent family farmers that want to raise a few head of livestock, or even 100 head, or, you know, livestock, they don't have any buyers. They might have one buyer in their region. There's a ton of price manipulation. You don't have to look much further than the fact that some of the largest poultry companies in the world were just recently indicted for price fixing by the Justice Department. So we know that system is broken. So we had to think of ways to, you know, create a more fair system. One of the ways we do that is strengthening antitrust laws like the Packers and Stockyards Act, create more fair price reporting. We also ensure that there's country of origin labeling so that consumers have a right to know, you know, that they're buying American. And currently you don't have that right. You know, beef you buy, or pork you buy, or poultry you buy could be shipped in from other countries, and it's not required to be labeled, you know, product of Brazil or product of Argentina, etc. We do that for beef and dairy, or pork, meat and dairy, which is currently exempt from that. And so those are some of the significant components that that we think can shift from this enormous factory farm consolidation, which are huge polluters, etc., to get back to that sort of grass-based regenerative livestock production that we're talking about in the previous bill in the Agriculture Resilience Act. You sort of need both of these things, right? So, you know, Todd asked earlier about, like, where are the requirements? Well, number one, you have to create a new market, a new system. We do some of that in the Climate Resilience Act. We do some of that through antitrust enforcement here. And then you can sort of use the legislative hammer of you know, getting rid of these largest factory farms, which we know are the sort of largest polluters in the process. And so we need to sort of start separating in our minds the difference between these sort of mega factory farms and thinking of them sort of more like the fossil fuel industry, and then thinking of sort of more regenerative, resilient family farm practices as sort of a more reasonable approach to, you know, producing livestock. So So I'll stop there. I'm sure there's a bunch of questions about this one, Todd, but that's what I've got so far.
Oh, that's great. All right, let's just take stock of where we are in timing and everything. It's 12:48. How many more do we have to cover?
That's all we've got we've got the pesticide bill, and we've got the forest bill, which I know you've already talked a little about. So,
all right. So let's see, Liz, how are questions looking? I think we should keep going and come back to questions because I don't see that there are any specific to that. Well, there's a question about cool labeling.
okay.
What is this question? Do global trade agreements prevent cool labeling?
Yeah, great question. So back in so we did have country of origin labeling on meat products for a number of years, in the sort of mid 2000s. In 2015, basically the World Trade Organization made a ruling that suggested that ruling sort of said that our current country of origin labeling requirements on beef products in particular violated a WTO rule. And they asked for sort of revision and some updates to that. What ultimately came of that ruling is that the powers that be in sort of corporate meat used that as a tool to push for the full repeal of country of origin labeling in Congress, which did happen. And we now know that there was number one, there's sort of two things to think about in these trade agreements. That number one, the WTO now has very little enforcement over that, given our current administration's position on the WTO and the way that the sort of WTO has fell apart. I'm not a trade expert, but many will have a lot to say about that. Secondly, this issue could have been and was not addressed in the new NAFTA agreement, which really didn't make any significant improvements, actually didn't make any significant changes related to sort of imports and exports of particularly meat products. So it is not specifically written into any federal or any international trade agreements that we can't have country of origin labeling. It was that World Trade Organization ruling that led to its repeal. And we believe that it now is a time and that it can easily be restored. We believe that the changes that needed to be made were actually in the USDA rulemaking process, and that can be achieved at USDA.
All right, wonderful. So with that, let's pop to the next slide if you have those other two bills there.
Yep.
And if you'd like to say some things about them quickly,
Yep.
and then we'll invite Liz to talk about the Pesticide Act.
That's
when
great.
you're ready, Liz, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just start out. I would just start out and let Liz jump right in. But I would just start out by saying that this is a significantly aggressive piece of pesticide reform that would be a significant improvement to our current pesticide laws. Many of you, just from the farm perspective, many of you probably know the challenges that farmers and ranchers are having with things like dicamba and Roundup and others that sort of are leading to these enormous lawsuits and losses for farmers and ranchers. So I think that the farm and ranch community welcomes significant reform, and this outlines, was only introduced recently, but definitely outlines some significant improvement. So I'll let Liz jump.
Well, the Protect America's Children from Toxic Pesticides Act, proposed by Tom Udall in the Senate and John Negusa in the House, and also supported by Warren and Sanders and Booker and some others, would ban the major pesticides, organophosphates, neonicotinoids, the herbicide paraquat. An EPA would have to suspend and review any pesticides that are banned in Europe and Canada. So that would include the herbicide atrazine. It would also tighten the approval process and requirements for listing of inerts, and set up a citizen petition process to EPA for identifying dangerous pesticides. So that would give all of us a voice in saying we want these looked at. It would improve labeling, have labels translated into Spanish and any other language where there were 500 or more pesticide applicators. The United States currently sprays over 1 billion pounds a year of toxic substances on our land. This bill would end emergency exemptions like the one that the Secretary of Agriculture gave to dicamba. And it would also, the bill would also prevent the preemption of the right of localities, states, or counties to have higher standards in terms of banning toxic materials than the national level. This bill doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of getting passed as long as the Farm Bureau has any say about it. It will be enormously opposed by the pesticide industry. But if there are enough of us who really get behind it, it would be a magnificent bill to pass. So that's
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Liz.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I'm excited about this one. I don't know how many people care about the bees and the butterflies, but I do. And so anyway, this one makes me happy.
But the relation between this and climate is that large-scale agriculture has to use these materials in order to have bigger areas that 1 or 2 people can farm. On a smaller scale, you can have better agricultural practices and you don't need these toxic materials.
Wonderful. And it just shows how we're going to tie all the various passions because none of these issues have enough muscle behind them to win on their own. But if we all come together, they will. And we get each interest group excited, seeing that their piece of the pie is in the mix. And that's our broader strategy of coalition building and bringing all the various activists who care about certain things together so we have a much better chance of passing something next year. I'm going to invite Rick Jacobson from Environmental Investigation Agency. Rick, are you ready? Just to touch briefly on the forest crime-free supply chain. We've heard from Rick last time, and Attell talked about this bill, so it's going to be brief because the bill's not yet filed. But just a little quick update, I guess, on the filing and just a couple sentences on what it does.
Sure, thanks. So the bill is being led by Senator Schatz and Representative Blumenauer, and the process was moving along nicely in terms of identifying some co-sponsors earlier this year, and then the pandemic hit, and they decided it wasn't yet the right time. So they've been waiting, and the last we talked with them, they do want to get the bill introduced so that it's out there this year, but we're still not sure exactly how soon that's going to happen. But I think we all understand the sooner the better, probably, given how things are going to go with elections coming up. So just to recap briefly, the bill, I guess it's included in this group of bills because its objective is to address the footprint the U.S. has on global forests and how that's contributing to deforestation, especially in the tropics. And that deforestation is mostly driven, about 80% driven by agricultural commodities expansion. And most of that is large-scale commercial agriculture. And the U.S. is a major consumer of some of these commodities and other products made from these commodities. The big ones driving deforestation being beef, soy, palm oil, and pulp from wood plantations. So the idea of the bill would be for U.S. importers, and this does apply to many of the same companies we've been discussing, the big agricultural traders, whether that's Cargill or JBS, which is the world's biggest meat company from Brazil, but is starting to import more and more beef into the U.S. Since the U.S. ban on Brazilian beef was lifted in February, and various large Southeast Asian companies that trade in pulp and paper products and palm oil. So there's a lot of big actors involved in this trade, and also a lot of major manufacturers. And the idea is that when importing into the U.S., there would be a requirement for understanding where the product came from, where it was produced, and determining whether there was a risk that there was illegal deforestation according to the laws of the producer country. The focus is on legality because the majority of deforestation is actually illegal. And in Brazil, the estimates now under the current government are that nearly 100% of the deforestation happening actually violates Brazilian law fundamentally. We're talking about things like overrunning indigenous land, protected areas being ignored, illegal burning to clear land for pasture, and so forth. So in light of that, we think the U.S. needs to show leadership in saying that we are not going to accept agricultural commodities that were produced illegally, produced in violation of laws meant to protect the environment and human rights. And the law would also actually establish a prohibition on any products that did originate from land that was illegally converted to pasture or farm or whatever. So it essentially establishes strong due diligence requirements for U.S. importers. This is also of interest to U.S. producers in some sectors because they, in the end, are competing in the U.S. to some extent, but also in international markets for the products of illegal deforestation. And that's like nowhere more obvious than the competition between the U.S. and Brazil for the Chinese soy and beef markets. So there is some interest within the U.S. In terms of how this can actually create a fair playing field for U.S. producers. But that is a scenario complicated by the role of the big traders who have these monopolistic positions, both globally and also within the U.S. So in the end, I think some of the objectives of the other bills, in trying to address the power and rein in some of the behaviors of these big traders is very much part of what this bill is intending to do. And just one other thing to mention about the bill, it's got a few other pieces, and one of them that we think is important is it would establish a public procurement preference for the U.S. government for deforestation-free products. So it would establish a standard for evaluating bids that would look at the policies of the supplier in terms of ensuring that the product's production wasn't driving deforestation. So I just wanted to mention that because the U.S. Is such a major, U.S. government is such a major consumer of these products. So I think I'll leave it there. If that, Todd, if you think I've covered, what I need to for now.
Yeah, no, that sounds great, Rick. Ideally, the sooner it can be filed, the easier it'll be for us to incorporate into things. But we have, this is a rolling process, so there's timing will, be what it is. I think that sounds great. All right, so Greg, we have a poll for everyone on these bills. And it's just to take the pulse of the room, really, to see where we're going. It includes the other bills that we're not going to delve into today: the plastics bill, the fracking bill, the hydrofluorocarbon bill. So they're on there, but we've had presentations on all those things before. So if you feel you have enough information to vote on those, that's great. If not, we can cover them in more later. But Greg, you want to pop that poll up? There they are. And we can leave this open while we continue to talk. And I just want to invite Keith. This is just to get a feel for how you're leaning toward these bills. Let's see. Keith, did you want to say just a couple words about drawdown? You've been doing analysis. Keith is doing an analysis of how all these bills relate to drawdown, or not all of them, but several of them. And he has a couple already finished, and we're just going to invite you to just mention a few words about that.
Sure, absolutely. For those of you who are not familiar with drawdown, it's a research organization, international research organization that has been in operation since 2014, issued its first report in 2017, in the form of a book edited by Paul Hawken, and its latest results are online at drawdown.org in the form of the Drawdown Review, which I urge all of you to take a close look at. Of the bills we've talked about today, the ones that align very, very closely with the methods of addressing climate change, or as we prefer to say in Project Drawdown related work, global warming. We can't prevent climate change that's been going on for billions of years, will continue to go on, but we can address a global warming from human causes. So the bill that really tracks very, very closely with specific drawdown recommendations is the Agriculture Resilience Act. I could, but won't go into detail on how many of these specific solutions proposed by drawdown it tracks with, but there's a very high degree of correlation between the proposals in the bill and drawdown solutions. The, let's see, the moratorium bill does not have specific alignments with Project Drawdown solutions, which are all aimed at reducing sources of CO2 equivalent emissions, and does not address policy per se. So there's no direct alignment there, although in a broad sense, Project Drawdown would certainly not be standing in the way of that bill. Farm System Reform Act, the alignment that's most close with Project Drawdown's goals and methods is the $100 billion of investment for transition to more regenerative production. Seems to me like I'm leaving out some. Let me look here at my notes. Climate Stewardship Act, also broad correlations, let's say general alignment with Project Drawdown goals and methods. In general, the Project Drawdown lines has two overarching realms of action. One is reducing sources of CO2 equivalent emissions.
Keith, we're having a little bit of
And
audio
the two
delay on your.
solutions will reduce. Sorry to hear that. Let's see. Yeah, I've got to notice it says my connection is unstable, so I'll just try to speak up over that if I can. And let's see. The Climate Stewardship Act. Yeah, in general, there are good alignments between these bills and many of the solutions that Drawdown proposes. I can get details of that fact to people as they desire. But as I said, the Agricultural Resilience Act is the one that has a very detailed alignment, and with the other bills, close close to synchronicities.
Wonderful, Keith. Thank you. And as we were writing up, our review of everything, we'll include Keith's analysis of the drawdowns and how it connects to everything. We're going to put up another poll real quick because I know sometimes people have to leave a little early. This poll, and I'm switching results, is we'll keep this up, the other one, and we're going to add the poll inviting you to the various bill team sectors. So if you're interested in being on a team that's reviewing, legislation in the Climate Crisis Select Committee's plan, and the Senate, I hear, is coming out with a plan, it'll be by topic, the sectors. So please go ahead and volunteer for those, and that way we'll have your email, and then the leads from those teams will be in touch Can we have both polls up at the same time, Greg? Oh, here it is, polling 2. I don't want to stop the last one. Okay, yeah, there's polling 2, bill support. So polling 1, I guess. I assume they can both go up at once. And then,
Todd, it's only one at a time.
oh, it is.
Yeah, so it's polling 3 right now.
I see polling 2. Which
just
bills
put up-
would you support?
I haven't launched it yet, but I'm getting ready to launch sector choice.
Oh, and then we have to stop the other one to do that?
Yeah, I
There's
think
only
so.
34 people have voted out of 84, which is fine. Oh, you closed it already. Polling
Yeah.
is closed. But you can results. I'm going to share the results for now. And all right. Well, let's.
Hi, for on the phones, how do we vote?
Oh, we can't vote from the phone, unfortunately, but we'll have other opportunities for input along these lines.
So to be able to sign up, just go where?
Well, just make sure you're on our list. Now that you've joined the Zoom, you'll be on our list. We'll send out an
Okay,
intake.
so it's not final. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'll send out a questionnaire with all that. All right, so let's go ahead and then I'm going to invite Joshua to come up and just say a few words about his review of this legislation from a media, marketing, journalism perspective, while we take a poll on your interest in being a part of the bill teams by sector. So Josh, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Jake, for going through all these bills. I think that just a couple points that I wanted to make, and it relates, I think towards sort of the next stage that we'll be in after we compile, the bill package. But I think it's important to keep in mind as we're looking at the bills right now, and that's sort of in the overall framing and marketing of them, and really the sort of the messaging that will be both to the general public, but also I think to our own participants and organizers, and then eventually to lawmakers as well. And I think that it's twofold. It's one that certainly we're looking at all of these in the overall environmental goals of carbon sequestration and emissions reduction, and that's part of the sort of larger messaging fight that we have in creating this urgency for legislation that does that. But I think along with that, we should keep in mind that that goes hand in hand with a range of other benefits, that these bills bring that are crucial to highlight. And there are benefits economically in terms of job creation and public health and sustainability and resilience. And, just looking at a few of the bills that Jake highlighted, the Climate Stewardship Act, as well as the Agricultural Resilience Act, you are instituting these sort of regenerative practices that, in addition to helping with carbon sequestration, is helping farmers have resilience to drought, is also helping farmers. You mentioned the Soil Carbon Cowboys documentary, and I think hearing from farmers that are saying these are goals that we actually want to move towards because they end up, making more money for us, and that we spend less money on fertilizers and pesticides, as well as resisting drought, or renewable energy solutions that create independence from the national grid, as well as bringing down costs. In terms of tree planting, the fact that it's also focusing on tree planting in urban areas that are tremendously heat prone, and will help with air quality in those areas. And so I think that as we focus on sort of the larger picture, to remember that there's a lot of really important messaging and selling points in this sort of in the nitty gritty of these bills. So I would, especially Jake, if you have any points on responding to that, or if we've framed it wrong. But I think that there are a lot of farmers that are actually really open to these ideas, and sort of the crux of it is that transition that you discussed, which is providing the incentives, the technical assistance, and the funding to kind of get them to that end goal that's both good for the planet and good for farmers.
Great. And so wonderful. thank you. And we know there's a lot more that we're going to be doing on this front. Obviously, it's just the beginning of how we tell the story as a whole, and then how we highlight specific exciting elements that will get people excited about it. So if everyone's voted on which teams they'd like to be on, and this is not the last chance you'll get to do that, it's just our first attempt at trying to collect everybody by team, because we'll have your emails by team. We'll close this polling in just a second, and then we'll go back to the bills, because I hear that some people might not have gotten enough time to vote on those. And again, it's just the preliminary pass at this, and we'll have more time to give input on which bills you're excited about, et cetera, and to ask questions. Ray, timing, so it's quarter after. What have I forgotten in terms of our plans for presentation? I think that covered everything. I still have a lot of questions as well mostly about what's missing. Before I move on to that, Bill, Greg, is it possible to end the second poll in the sectors and then go back to the other poll? Does it work that way? And I apologize, everybody. We're all just learning still how to manage this. But so what I was going to say why this happens, I'll let Greg figure that out, is that there are a lot of questions. Oh, do you have something, Greg, you wanted to say?
Yeah, I'm looking at the bill support poll. Can you see it?
I'm looking at the bill team, the sector teams.
I think you have to bring it up for yourself if you want to see it.
All right, let's just share these results. Oh, here's, how do I do that? You bring up the other poll?
Stop sharing the results.
Oh, well that.
And then at the top, there's a drop down menu.
Oh, I see, bill support. Okay, guys, everybody, if you can go up to your own bills, there we go. And we can relaunch polling. Should we click that? Yeah, I'll click it, see what happens. First, I'm going to share the results just so people can see them, and I'm going to relaunch the polling. We'll clear existing poll results. Oh, we don't want to do that. So I don't know what to do about this at this point.
I think you need to just leave it the way it is.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, everybody. So there are a lot of questions still remaining, like how do we move to mandates across areas where we need changes in practices? And so we'll look at that and see, what the thoughts are on that front, and we'll add that to our what's missing list. Jake, did you have any thoughts about that broader question?
Yeah, I think it's, we can dig in there a little bit, because I think it goes to that sort of message conversation we were just having a moment ago, right? Is that the key ultimately is that I don't think, farmers and ranchers are going to be opposed to, structures of mandates. And now let me also be clear, when I say farmers and ranchers, and I'm going to continue to bring this up as we go through this process, is that we really need to be very clear when we segment, when we talk about farmers and ranchers, from when we talk about the sort of farm agribusiness conversation. So we heard sort of the reference to Farm Bureau, and we can throw, a lot of other multinational corporations into that. We can throw commodity groups into that group. But the sort of average, farmer, independent family farmer or rancher is ultimately going to be understanding and accepting of potential mandates that sort of build resilience within the farm system, that help them find ways to be more regenerative and sustainable in their practices and make more profitability. But we really need to be clear about describing the transition first. So that's the thing that from a political, particularly from a rural political standpoint, which we work on most, often these discussions of climate change sort of leap right to mandates, right? The first thing we hear about is mandates. And the sort of generational family farmer who's been shrinking in numbers for the last 6 decades and who just hit another record level in farm bankruptcies are sort of scratching their head, asking themselves, how am I going to implement more regenerative practices, which, let's be honest, at least in the interim, are going to be more expensive for them just by the nature of transition. Now, over time, their cost of productions may fall, and we hope that over time, their profitability, right, what folks are willing to pay for those sorts of things, will also increase. But what most of those people are looking at right now is the near term, the next, say, 3 to 5 years. And if we start issuing a bunch of sort of mandates and requirements without really articulating and spending time defining the just transition first, that's where we're going to run ourselves into political trouble. So what we've been doing early on is to try to talk about the voluntary components of that, which is really defining the just transition first. And then that gets us leaps and bounds closer to getting rid of, the sort of most polluting and ultimately when every sort of corn and soybean farmer in America is planting cover crops, or 93% of them are doing that, then we won't have a hard time sort of issuing mandates that to get sort of federal farm subsidies or reforming the farm subsidy system to tie those conservation things together. But the problem is now is that it's actually a much smaller percentage that are doing that. And even though we're spending a lot of money from a federal standpoint invested in conservation programs, those conservation programs are way oversubscribed today. So lots of farmers who want to plant more cover crops or want to plant more pollinator habitat who just can't get access to the federal programs that help them do that. So when that's their sort of daily experience, there's a lot of apprehension that the government sort of mandate will be all they see and not sort of the components of the just transition. So I would just incentivize, I would just talk about or encourage this group to think about the just transition definition first and then the mandate second. And we can include those all in a broader package, yes, but it's just about how we message it and define it.
Very interesting. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I was thinking about mandates and, for the big ag.
Yeah.
So we have a moratorium on their mergers, but that's not going to make them go away anytime soon.
Yep.
So where are the mandates that apply to the major corporations that are really the lion's share of the damage and the malfeasance?
And I think that is a place where we're missing, right? I think, Todd, you're pointing out that we don't have legislation that sort of, for example, one of the things that I didn't get to that the Farm System Reform Act does is that rather than holding farmers liable for the sort of pollution and waste and manure that comes off of the factory farms, it actually shifts that liability to the mega corporations. We need to be doing that in all sorts of areas. We need to be, doing things like shifting liability and responsibility to, agrochemical companies. And we need to be ensuring that when these sort of big importers and exporters, like we were talking about around the deforestation issue, there's probably a number of things that we should be sort of including in our federal purchasing criteria of, definitely illegal deforestation, but also are those folks using that are importing or exporting that, are they using major polluting practices in other countries that are just externalizing, global pollution and carbon emissions to other parts of the world? Those are definitely critical mandates that don't currently exist and we need to legislate around.
All right, well, wonderful. That's exciting because I like talking about what we have and I like talking about what's missing because I think that's exciting too and shows us point where we're going to go and, gives us something to work toward in addition. Okay, everybody. Well, each one of these calls is a challenge, as you might imagine, getting everybody together and then the topics and how it's going to play out. We had 95 people join the call today, which is really wonderful that there's so much sustained interest in this conversation and this effort. Couldn't be more excited about it. Just want to invite everybody to our call next Monday who wants to be on the core team and, do the back end organizing of things. And we'll have another call like this. It's scheduled for 2 weeks from now. Part of me was thinking it would be nice to take a little break for the summer before it's gone. So we'll see. If you get word that it's going to be canceled, we will. But so far it's on. We'll figure out the programming for that. I think we need to keep looking at the remaining bills that we sort of talked about. The poll came back pretty positive on all fronts. There was a little hesitation on the refrigerants bill, which is sort of surprising to me. I think it could be, maybe we don't know that as much about it, but it's a pretty straightforward bill to ban hydrofluorocarbons, which are major greenhouse gas element, and methane, I think it addresses. So maybe we'll recap those a little bit next call. We'll figure out what to do on the next call, on our Monday core call. And as always, please stay in touch via email if you have any questions. Things are moving forward. I know that Brenna has invited people to the marketing team. Corinna has invited people to the faith organizing. I don't know if Corinna's still with us. I know she was going to be on for a minute and then had to hop off. If you're still here and you want to say anything, you'd be welcome to. So let me think. I think that's it for today. We're doing great. Things are forging ahead, and we'll just continue all these conversations, and we'll see you on the next calls. Any other closing thoughts, anyone?
Thanks for all your
Yeah, I
hard
think
work.
people shouldn't be upset about the vote on the bills. I think there needs to be more time to reflect and to vote.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Yes, please. We'll continue
we'll
giving
be
you
doing
input
it
on the
again.
bills. And yeah, we didn't mean to rush that. I'm sorry about that. I was just worried about losing everybody and not getting to that other question, because that other question was about us, how we're going to organize as teams.
Yeah. Todd, what about recording this? Some of the explanations were so spot on. And
Everything's been recorded. All of our calls are, these calls are posted on the YouTube channel, Climate Crisis Policy on YouTube. And then our core calls are posted on our Facebook page.
Oh, this is fabulous. All right. All right. I guess you told me that, but I didn't know what that meant. Okay.
All right, Rachel. Thank you, everybody.
Can I just,
Yeah.
Todd, can I just say, if anybody's interested in starting working with a legislative team and kind of getting ready to bring stuff to legislators, which won't be happening for a little while, but we're trying to round up who can go to different legislators in different states, please do sign up on the intake form. It's posted somewhere in the chat, and or just email Todd and he'll pass the information along. But we can use people all around the country. We're trying to get ready so that we can roll once it's time to push bills. We'll be able to get people all across the country to go visit their legislators and talk to them.
Thank you, Tara. And I should have had you and Meryl and Paula a slot on today for that pitch.
All right.
They're doing great work organizing the country by regions. It's all been divided up, and we're looking for point people by states and by region to fill in a few. And but that team's active and working. All right. Well, I can't think of anything else.
Okay.
So we'll sign off for now, huh?
Yes. Thank you.
This was great. Thank you.
I just put the intake form back up on the chat if people want it.
Okay, the intake form is in the chat in case you want to adopt a district. And now we just have to, as we're closing out, we have to save this chat, which I'm going to do now. All right, wonderful. And Jake, I think that went well. All the farm bills had a lot of support, so I think
Yeah,
we're
great.
getting there. We're getting there.
Wonderful.
We're eager to keep working on it, Todd, and keep us in the loop. We will. I don't know that it'll be me, but I think Cody might be joining those evening calls. So we're eager to continue the collaboration.
Oh, thank you so much. We're so excited about that.
Very good.
All these worlds are coming together, and that's really our big goal.
Definitely.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.